Hello. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Seem to be a little thinner on the ground this morning. There's a surprise. Couple of housekeeping things I just wanted to say. As I mentioned yesterday to those of you that were here, unfortunately April is poorly and won't be able to join us, so that does change the shape of this afternoon's programme somewhat. We do have a documentary called I Am Woman Now, which follows the story of, I think it's 5 early trans women from the sort of early 60s. We can play that. It's an 86-minute long film. We would start that at 1:15 in here. And we also have, as I said, I think Kay and Bev will go through onto the gallery. So if you wanted to go through onto gallery and talk to them through there about the exhibition and follow up maybe some of them yesterday, you could do that. However, in the spirit of democracy, what we could also do, because we didn't have a time to do any kind of feedback after the session yesterday, if people would like to do that and have a general longer kind of feedback Q&A session, kind of plenaries, that we could do that in that gap instead. To people, I'm just conscious that it's very warm, the seats aren't that comfortable. 86 minutes watching a documentary might be a bit of a stretch, particularly when it's nice outside. Do people have a particular opinion that they would like to express about how we feel that? Jenny Ann. Right.
It's quite hard to accept.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's been shown at a couple of films.
Okay. Okay. So I mean, we can absolutely put the film on and do the screening. So if people want, we'll do that then. We'll put the film on, and then if people want to talk a bit more about any of the issues that were raised yesterday about April Ashley and the NML partnership, etc., there'll be people on gallery that you can talk to through there. We'll do that. So that means the film will run until 2:45, which cuts your tea break down to 15 minutes if you're watching the film, because we must start the breakout sessions this afternoon at 3 o'clock, because we do have to finish by 5, because the museum staff would like to go home. Breakout sessions, I'll quickly run through them. It hopefully is very simple. You just get to see the other 2 people that you didn't see yesterday. So if you are an A, you will have the first workshop is with Catty Mustala, and you are in ER1, which is the big room downstairs behind reception on the left. If you are in Group B at 3 o'clock, you will have Andrew Logan, the artist, in ER1, which is the big room behind reception on the left. If you are in Group C, you stay in this room, and you have Val Stevenson from Liverpool John Moores University. And if you are in Group D, you are with Dirk Denner from the Tom of Finland Foundation in the Global City Theatre, which is downstairs to the right of reception. And there'll be some swapping going on, but you'll have people to help work out where you're going. Somebody asked me if I would ask you if you mind if we share the contacts. Obviously, I have everybody's contacts because although you thought it was Bev, it was me that you were dealing with via email. So I have everybody's contact details, and would you find it useful and would you be happy for me to put a list together and share the list to all of the delegates? Anybody who doesn't want me to share their details, please come and see me. And can I stress the evaluation form? I figured that probably a lot of you will have lost your bags or lost your evaluation forms, which were in the bags. So at the moment, Julia's printing off some new evaluation forms, and we'll put them on the table over there. But it would be really, really helpful to us if you could give us an evaluation of the event, not least so that we can go back to our funders and say, look what we did with your money. But it would also be really useful for us both as organisations to know what we did right and what we did wrong in case we do this again, which would be great. That's it, I'll shut up. And we are going to start this morning's session with Zorian Clayton from the Victoria and Albert Museum.
Hello, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm Zorian from V&A. I'm the Assistant Curator of Paintings and Drawings there. I've been working at the museum for about 2.5 years. And since I joined the museum, I've joined the LGBTQ network, which at V&A is like a working group where we put on all different kinds of events. And we don't have a budget because we're sort of an unofficial group, but we're in the process of becoming more official, which means that we have to run things by more people, and it's a little bit more complicated, but we might get a budget, which is the plus point out of this. So I'm just going to run through a few slides of the kinds of events that we do to show the sort of broad range of things. The main thing that we always do is the History Month events in February, and we usually have 5 performers on, or talks and tours, that kind of thing. We have a resource at the museum called the Princeton Drawing Study Room, where people can call up any of the things we keep in the stores and have a look at them. So it's a really good thing when we can have events where this is all objects which are out from the collection. There's Della Grace volcano photographs and Nan Goldin and political posters and things. And this is Kat Brogan, who's a performance poet who did like a poetry workshop where people wrote things inspired by the objects that we had. This is Assistant Curator Matthew Story, with his hands on his hips like that. It was another talk with more things from the stores. And over the years, like our History Month events have really grown. The audiences have got considerably bigger over just the last 3 years. This is Ronald Wright, who I don't know if anybody was at the last Homotopia. He's about 85. He's a very interesting guy who used to do drawings in the style of Tom of Finland that were in a lot of the physique magazines in the 50s and 60s. And he gave a talk about gay life in London in that time. And we had the Pink Singers. It's really exciting for us to be able to put on events using the big gallery spaces. So yeah, they were fantastic, and this is in the medieval and Renaissance galleries, and it was a very wonderful moment. Bird La Bird is someone I want to talk about quite a bit, because she got the biggest audience by far of any tour. I think on an average gallery tour, which they run on a daily basis of different galleries and things, you maybe get 10 to 30 people on an average sort of tour. And Bird had 150, 200 people, and it was absolutely incredible. And she really broke the mold on the kind of things which were queer objects, really, because she was talking about things which were not necessarily LGBTQ related at all, but she started outside the museum and rechristened it because she was against the monarchy, essentially. So she didn't want the museum to be called the Victoria and Albert Museum, and so she rechristened it the Queer Knickknacks and Emporium Shop or something. And she talked about working class women and women prisoners and 19th century cultural life. And in the Asian gallery, she talked about the like viceroys of India and colonialism and the famines in 1870s in India, but all through kind of a queer perspective. So it really completely shifted, because a lot of the time with our History Month events, we're looking for objects which have a direct, clear link that's going to be clear to everybody, that it's not tenuous. But she proved if you're a really good performer and you're a really powerful speaker, you can pretty much queer anything. And we had amazing feedback from this. With a lot of people saying that it completely changed the way that they viewed museums and how you can look at it completely through your own eyes. She was a bit. She wanted to savage the monarchy quite a bit, which is fine because, you know, for a museum which is called Victorian Albert Museum, in fact, it's not really regal inside the collections. There's one room in the British Galleries where there's things about Queen Victoria's coronation and things like that. But she wanted to take quite a firm line on that, and I was like, well, that's fine, but maybe I should check with my boss or whatever, that, you know, in case other passers-by or people in the museum have been like, what's this all about, actually? But yeah, she was fantastic. So we branched out of just doing the History Month events to sort of have a queer presence at a lot of the other main events which happen in the museum on a regular basis. So this is from a Friday late that we had. This is, that you can't see their faces, it's Rhiannon Stiles and H. Pluitt, who are very interesting performance artist people. And they posed in different kind of mannequin costumes in the galleries. This is my friend Jana. She did a workshop. This is the Club Friday late. So in that there was a lot of Lee Bowery, Boy George, and all the club kids and all that kind of thing. So she was making fingerless gloves and accessories and that sort of thing. We had, this is a film which was screening, so we really don't want the events to sort of be tucked away. We really want to sort of integrate them and use as much of the gallery space as possible. So this was a drag, you can't really see that it's a drag queen who was very slowly applying lipstick in a 10-minute film. And then we thought that we would try and get in on the Black History Month programme as well, which is October. This is a film about Bayard Rustin, who was very interesting. He was marginalised and put in the background of the whole political system because he was gay. And it's a very brilliant film. If you haven't seen it, I'd really recommend it. His story is really incredible. And we had a lot of good feedback again from lots of different people writing in and saying how great it was to have a gay, an LGBTQ event in the Black History Month. And this is Bird again. She was so great. We got her back again. It was like an artist with her. This was a display in the ceramics gallery called Deception. That was a lot of the objects were quite kitsch, like fruit and vegetables which look real but they're not real, and ceramic cakes and things like that. So she created a character called Birdie Slipware, who was supposed to be a sculptor who makes like hyper-real ceramics and things. So that was a lot of fun. That's her again. The excellent headpiece. My background is in film. I love screening films and doing cinema things. So we have lovely lecture theatres at the museum, and so we screened a Betty Bourne documentary. Can't really see. That's Betty Bourne. If you haven't seen this film as well, I'd highly recommend it. And again, we had a lot of people from the early days of the Gay Liberation Front who came to this because Betty was very involved in that. So we're always trying to sort of really diversify the programme, so it's, you know, all different kinds of people from all backgrounds and age groups will be represented. This is part of, we had a connection with British Pathé where we could screen any of their films for free. So I scoured through the 5 million or however many clips that they have on British Pathé website to find queer-related content, and we did a mini festival of all of this. This is April Ashley on. I was going to talk about the work that we do is cataloguing and making sure that people will be able to section which have any kind of LGBTQ connection. So you could broadly sort of split those into 4 categories where it's LGBTQ people. So this is April Ashley on a Grayson Perry pot called My Heroes. And then we have quite a lot of paintings or drawings of LGBTQ people as well. This is John Gielgud from the Theatre and Performance collection. And then we've got, this is Chevalier Dion. I don't know if you're aware of this figure, 18th century figure. So we catalogue, this is Zeus and Hercules. Ganymede, sorry, and we had some difficulties with cataloguing because should every single Ganymede or Hercules or Saint Sebastian have the gay and lesbian tag on? Probably not, but in this instance, you could say yes. So we've got about 2.5 million objects in the whole collection, and we've been steadily trying to build, going through everything and really trying to find all of the stuff which could be tagged. This is a cane handle, this is another sort of type of object which maybe has, you might look at it and say, well, there's nothing LGBTQ about its maker, or but there's something about the pose and the stance. Essentially, this is a cane handle, 17th century, I think, of a woman, of a girl wearing breeches, which is very unlikely. So we might come across an item like this as some kind of cross-dressing or campness or something in it. We would mark that. This is Rocky Horror Picture Show item. Then there's quite a few homoerotic photographs and things like that which we've uncovered. This is Wilhelm von Glauden. Pretty much, he was a German photographer in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and he pretty much only took photographs of Sicilian teenage boys in pastoral settings. And we've got a lot of political posters and things, a lot from the 70s and 80s. From feminist groups, gay groups, there's a lot of lesbian posters that we have, and a lot of AIDS-related posters and ephemera. That's the end. The other things, hang on, how much time do I have? A few minutes. 1 or 2 minutes. Just quickly to sort of round up, the other thing which we've been working on quite a bit is the terminology. So at the moment, the heading is just gender and sexuality as like a blanket heading, and there's no smaller terms yet in the system. So if we can really implement that, it's supposed to be happening very soon. We've written all the terminology and it's been handed over to the appropriate people. So once this has happened, then hopefully things will be much, much easier to search, and that means it's easier for people to research things and quickly accessible. So hopefully our group will be able to continue. We've really pleased with how it's grown, and we're still quite a small group with no budget, but we've managed to put on a really broad range of things nonetheless. And it would be amazing if we could have a budget, because I really believe in being able to pay artists for their time. So that's what we want to get the budget for. But I hope that's been quite a broad show of the kind of things that we do. So is that? I'll hand you over to Marcus Dickey Horley from Tate.
Hello, everybody. I'm Marcus Dickey Horley, and I work at Tate in London. There are 4 Tate galleries, one next door to us here in Liverpool, 2 in London, and 1 in St Ives in Cornwall. And I'm mainly going to talk about the work that's been going on in London, because that's where I am, and that's where most of my experience has been. I work within the learning team, and the learning team is a department which engages visitors with the Tate collection through a variety of learning programs, events. And my department, public programs, generates a number of events, and I'm one of the curators within that small team. So starting with the original Tate Gallery, it's in Pimlico, quite an upper bracket part of London, really. I think, has everybody been to visit the original Tate Gallery, now called Tate Britain? If you don't know it, it's a classy-looking building on the banks of the River Thames. Some people have even commented that they feel that they have to be quite well dressed to get in. Here it is, and this terrific photograph shows Tate Britain flying the rainbow flag last summer in June, while Pride was on, Pride weekend. It was the first time that any flag other than the Union Jack had ever been flown above the Tate Gallery, and some discussion, of course, took place as to whether or not this groundbreaking first should happen, because are we opening the door for all sorts of other statements being made? Should other kinds of flags subsequently be flown? There were lots of counter-arguments, but in the end we had the full support of a significant number of people, including some of the trustees of the Tate Gallery, including Wolfgang Tillmans, the artist, director of Tate Britain, director of Tate St. Ives. A lot of people were very supportive of this significant political act, particularly since the Houses of Parliament are just to the right of the Tate Gallery. And so were it not for Millbank Tower in the middle there, then the MPs would all have seen our flag flying. In fact, they probably did, because they all come to the Tate restaurant for lunch every day, so a good thing for us. This is Tate Modern, the newest of the Tate galleries. It's become Britain's second busiest tourist attraction within the space of about 10 years. Built inside a power station by Sir Giles Gilbert Scott. He has some links with Liverpool as well, because the Anglican Cathedral up at the top of Hope Street was built by Giles Gilbert Scott when he was just 19 years old, his very first architectural commission. And he also built the ventilation pipes for the Mersey Tunnel, which looks a little bit like Tate Modern after the flood. And despite the fact that Tate Modern is huge, it's not big enough for the number of visitors it receives. Tate Modern gets about 5 million visitors per year, and so a huge extension building is being created right now. This large pyramid is in the process of being built, and if you go down to London now, you'll see the skeleton and the core is there, and the brickwork's going to be applied over the coming year for opening in about 2 years' time. And that's going to give us a lot of new opportunities for different ways to display the collection, and also considerable learning exchange as well. But in terms of events, LGBT, the work of the National Portrait Gallery in Trafalgar Square, because they've been doing this for quite some time, and they've considerably influenced the way I take a look at the Tate collection and the way I've formed the events that we run. A few years ago, the National Portrait Gallery put on a major exhibition called Gay Icons, and ever since then it's been running fairly regular late-night Thursday events called Queer Perspectives. And the model of Queer Perspectives is that somebody interesting with something to say is invited to take a look at the collection, choose a number of works, and then talk about it. And it's an incredibly successful model. Curated by Sadie Lee, they tried to start it off as a ticketed event with 20 places, but it got so popular that people were just turning up without tickets. So now they run it as a drop-in kind of an event, and they get huge audiences of, well, 60, 70, 80 people, which is phenomenal, but it does sometimes present logistic problems within the gallery. So I've taken a look at their model and I've applied it to the Tate collection, and I've got a few examples here of how it's worked at Tate and some figures for how popular it's been. One of the first people with something to say I invited into Tate to talk about the Tate Modern collection was an artist called David Hoyle, cabaret drag artist. He's well known in Manchester and in London, and he's got a heck of a mouth on him. And there was an element of risk, perhaps, in allowing somebody whose cabaret act is to let rip to do that in a gallery, in the Tate Gallery, in front of an audience of the general public to an extent. But I thought it was a chance worth taking. So we invited David to come along, take a look at the collection. The part of the collection that he chose to focus on was the Surrealist works. And here, I'm afraid you can't see any paintings, but he's surrounded by Salvador Dali and Man Ray and so on. And we probably got about 150 people coming along on a late Friday to participate in David Hoyle's tour. Because we had so many people, it did rather destroy the problem of whether the general public would happen upon this tour and potentially be upset by some of the things that he was saying, because as David and the tour moved into each room, the room was entirely full only of people who were coming to hear the tour. Everyone was kind of squeezed out a little bit. So problem solved, really. But I know that he did let rip, and he said some outrageous things, of course. But one very telling and important thing that he said at the start of his tour was, he was on stage just before the gallery door, and he said, "We're here, we're inside Tate. We're not outsiders anymore, we're right inside mainstream culture." And since the theme of this weekend is the Unstraight Museum, I wonder the extent to which large organisations like Tate, who are heavily branded, who are funded partly by British government, are seen as quite straight, quite aligned to the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and also have commitments and obligations which keep them straight. A massive success, and inspired me to invite another performer along. Timberlina gave a tour of one of our exhibitions, which was called The World as a Stage, and Timberlina called the tour Queer Confidence, and took a very interesting take on what was already quite a queer exhibition. The World of the Stage showed work by artists who engaged with the idea of theatre and theatricality, so straight away you can see that there is an opening for queer artists within that theme. We went in the exit, and we did the exhibition in reverse, and the thesis of the idea put forward by Timberlina was that sometimes artist isn't necessarily the gay artist. And so looking around, the queerest of all the artists within this exhibition turned out, in Timberlina's point of view, to be Jackson Pollock, a very, very straight, hard-drinking North American artist. Again, another huge audience. It was a ticketed event with about 100 places or so. But the next event we ran was an unticketed event at Tate Britain, Queer Britannia. The quality of the photograph is quite poor because it was taken just by an audience member and put up on social media afterwards, but it gives you an idea of what happened when I programmed an event, Queer Britannia, a look at the Tate Britain collection from a queer perspective, unticketed, just turn up at the meeting point. I guessed we'd probably get 80, 100 people along, but we had about 300 people turn up for the event. It was just enormous. Well, fortunately, we'd taken precautions and preparations around having a stage block, amplification, and we'd programmed the stops to be in very large rooms. But we significantly took over Tate Britain, and the Tate Britain collection has recently been rehung into a linear chronology. So rather than the more contemporary museum idea of having rooms which are curated themes, the Tate Britain collection pretty much starts in room 1 with paintings from Tudor Britain and then goes all the way through to 2014. And within each room, the paintings are hung in strict chronological order as well. So although it's a choice of works, what we've probably got as our material is British history. And within that line of British history, we can find all sorts of very exciting themes, such as queer Britain, such as Black Britain, such as the role of women. It's all there. You can see within the chronology when the first image, for example, of a gay person appears, and certain clusters within history when really quite gay things were happening. I'm thinking of Bloomsbury, and I'm thinking of these historic moments. Another recent event was looking at trans audiences and inviting 4 trans people into the Tate collection to look at representation, underrepresentation, what's important and significant for these 4 people. Juliet Jakes is a journalist for The Spectator who wrote a year-long blog about transitioning. Raphael Fox, you may recognize from a Channel 4 program, My Transsexual Summer. And there are also 2 other artists, C.N. Lester, who is a singer-songwriter, and Wild B, also a singer-songwriter. Each of these 4 people were given the run of the Tate to take a look at the collection, choose works, and create a 20-minute performance, tour, whatever you want, without any kind of censorship or direction. Just come in, take a stage in Tate and talk about what Tate is to you, what this collection means to you. And Fox chose to talk about whether artworks are ever gendered, and took a couple of sculptures from within the Tate collection displays and questioned whether these works have a gender. Juliet looked at history of trans life going back to 1930s Germany, choosing as a starting point a Christian Schad painting and creating a semi-fictionalized story of some of the first trans people in 1930s Germany. Going out beyond our gallery walls, we've also put together a kind of a virtual Tate gallery, which we can project. And this took place in Norwich, a city sort of 100 miles to the north of London, with a very, very strong LGBT identity going on at the moment. Norwich Pride is now in its 7th year, and in my view, it's one of the best prides in Britain. Partly because it's almost impossible to spend any money there. It's a totally non-commercial, totally society-based pride. You don't have to pay to get in, and it's fairly small. They get about sort of 7,000–8,000 people on their march, and it's very, very inclusive of local people as well. A lot of families, a lot of straight allies, a lot of shoppers just joining in the parade. But the purpose of this presentation, Art with a capital Q, was to engage with people who might not realize that they're walking into a presentation which looks at queer art from the Tate collection. So what I've done is I've created a very accessible, family-friendly, young people-friendly selection of artworks which give a really good example, particularly to young people, particularly to young 14, 15-year-olds who are hanging around in the square outside the library, to step in and watch a 30-minute film loop in which we've got Gilbert and George. I mean, you recognize some of the works here, Salvador Dali, Claude Cahun, and your presenter giving a little kind of a guided tour to this virtual Tate gallery. This slide looks to the future, particularly to 2017, which is coming fast, because this is going to be a significant and important date in Britain, because it marks 50 years since decriminalisation of homosexuality and 60 years since the Wolfenden report, which led to that decriminalisation. And it's likely that a lot of museums, galleries, all sorts of spaces for performance and display will be wanting to mark this significant anniversary in some way. And so Tate's LGBT staff network have been working with Tate Britain's director and the curators to take a look at the Tate collection, to identify queer content, looking back probably over 150 years, because we've taken a look at the collection, and kind of Simeon Solomon and this portrait of Sappho on the Isle of Lesbos is a pretty strong LGBT image. And we're inviting the curators to do something with Tate's content. At the very least, it will be a series of events. It might be a spotlight display in one of our rooms, or it might be something considerably bigger than that, and that's what we're hoping for. And I'm really unable to make any announcements right now because decisions are still being taken, even though 2017 is very close indeed, and major museums kind of plan 3-4 years ahead, so now's the time when decisions have to be taken. But this year I should be able to give some kind of an announcement about an exciting event at Tate Britain in 2017. So that's a bit of an idea about what's going on at Tate at the moment. Zorian, I wonder if you'd like to join me on stage now, because we've got a little time for questions and comments, if you'd like to ask Zorian and I anything else about the work that we're doing.
Hello.
Maybe I could start. Just I wondered whether Zorian could talk a bit about. You talked about the work that you've already done, but how much of that is motivated by you and interested members of staff, and how much of that comes from top down, if you like, and a policy?
All of the events that I showed were voluntarily curated and put on by the small LGBTQ network, because the museum does have some LGBTQ stuff happening as part of their main program. But for example, the Elm Green and Drag Set show, I don't know if anybody saw that. That was at the end of last year. Elm Green and Drag Set had recreated these kind of apartments of an elderly gay gentleman who was a failed architect, essentially. So it was quite a queer and quite a large LGBTQ-related thing which had been curated, which was nothing to do with us. But yeah, we just do it because you know, I think it's always good to have more LGBTQ events on in larger museums, and to really use a lot of the collections which are maybe not on display and make it more accessible for this kind of thing. But yeah, it's all done just voluntarily, all of that stuff.
This is all great stuff that you're doing, and of course in listening to you I've been thinking about how I can get my local museums to do the same sort of thing. Now, to a certain extent they're on board. I mean, MShed are very good. They let me do a presentation on LGBT superheroes during History Month this year, which was a lot of fun. But if we were to go to the older and stuffier museums in Bristol, what they would probably say is, I'm not sure about that, what people think, it's not respectable, is it? And what I want to be able to go to them and say is, look, V&A is doing this, Tate is doing this. I want to know how we can leverage what you're doing to influence other museums around the country to feel we should be doing that as well, because London has taken the lead.
I think we have not met resistance necessarily, but sometimes we do get from people higher up in the museum, like, sort of, why are you doing, not really in such blunt sort of terms, but so when we went to try and get budget and things like that, they were like, well, who's organising this? Like, you know what? And it was all because we were unofficial and we weren't really linked directly to any departments. Like, there were a couple of little battles that we had to fight. But one of the things we did do as well was say, look, you know, the Tate and NPG are doing, you know, and British Museum had they have queer tours and a little gay history book of their collection. So we used the other London museums as well to say, look, you know, look how popular these events are and how important they are, and it means a lot to people and it's super interesting. So, you know, so I think you should, you know, we can, if you want us to send you pictures of crowded events of lots of people applauding and say, look, you know, this is going to be great, then.
Something that at Tate that we've done to argue and justify is to take a look at our audience research, particularly statistical information about who our visitors are. We conduct regular surveys of who comes in, and at the last survey we conducted, 20% of people under 20 answered yes to the question, are you LGB or T? And that's just the people who answered yes. Then all the people who weren't asked and all the people who chose not to answer that question probably actually bumped that figure up to potentially a quarter of the people coming into the Tate Gallery aged under 20. And these are the visitors of the future. And so if galleries do want to diversify, to engage with the up-and-coming generations, then this is important statistical information which validates this kind of programming.
I think all museums as well say that it's one of the top line things that they'll say is we really want to diversify the audiences and make it all really equal, but a lot of the time maybe that doesn't actually necessarily always happen. So, you know, that's another thing you can use as a, you know, as a way to persuade them if they insist.
The discussion about the events that you've held, which have been kind of peripheral events during special months, quite a lot of the time it's LGB Pride Week related, that sort of thing, and you're slightly separated from the curatorial full-time ongoing staff and doing their exhibitions and things. And the thing that interests me is the disconnect that there seems to be between those sorts of events and your curators of collections who, when it comes to labeling their works, you know, often miss the LGBT content that should be there. And you'll know at the Tate, I think, from the civil partnership event that we had, that there was some criticism from Michael Petrie about labeling of the Cy Twombly exhibition, which covered his female relationships but left out any reference to the male. And I just wonder how much influence you have to go to your curators, because I know, for instance, the Tate, I've worked with them on Brixton Art Gallery and the gay group. They're putting something into the archive collection, but that's not in the mainstream collections. And what I find annoying or irritating is when you go around a gallery and find that often we're not there the rest of the year. We're only there on special events. So I wonder what influence you have to go to a curator and say, look, your label is completely missing something that I know about, you don't, and perhaps you're not prioritizing because it's, you know, you're a straight person who perhaps doesn't realize this is important. Do you have that kind of ability to intervene?
The staff network has influence. We're invited along to meetings that take before and after our exhibitions to comment. I'll just wait for the announcement to finish.
Okay. Are you in the David Hoyle photograph?
Oh. But while we're talking about captioning of artworks, there's a considerable trend at Tate right now to pretty much uncaption works, to have what they just call a tombstone. So name, date, title, medium, acquisition number. And certainly the interpretation team and the curators have gone right the way through the collection, and they've broadly removed a lot of interpretational information. And now that is delivered either on multimedia handsets or what you can pick up on your smartphone when you do a search on that artwork as you go around. I've not been given a clear explanation of why Tate wants to cut down or even remove its interpretational text, because I think that those interpretational texts are actually quite important, particularly when you're dealing with concepts of very modern art which are quite baffling. But that's a trend that's happening. At the moment in Tate Modern, there are a couple of references to the sexual orientation of specific artists if their work specifically addresses that issue of their life. But otherwise, in the case, for example, of Cy Twombly, we've got a massive collection at the moment, just donated, of the Bacchus paintings, 3 enormous artworks which have been compared to the Mark Rothko murals in terms of importance in their inclusion into the Tate collection. But again, no reference in the press release or in the interpretational information on the wall to this important aspect of Cy Twombly's life. I think that I'm unable to answer your question, other than to say the network is pressing for change.
And most of our labels, as it's a museum for art and design, most of our labels just reflect usually just the art and design angle, so rarely will there be personal information in that, but in the records there is more and more, so we try and really make sure that the Search the Collections feature on the website where you can read more about each work of art, that if it does have some kind of gender and sexuality or LGBTQ tag, that it will be explained there. But in the label text, yeah, you will rarely find it, because they're mainly just talking about how the thing's made and the, you know, relating it more to this kind of thing. But we really try to sort of branch out from just doing things around Pride and LGBTQ time and do things all the year round, but we have a bit of difficulty of getting people to know when things are on. So our History Month things are definitely the biggest things, because that's when everybody knows there's something happening. So.
Actually, I have a comment more than a question, and what I'm realizing by being at the conference here, in that the ICA had an exhibition of Tom of Finland last year, and it had really high numbers of attendance, and those numbers actually are available through the ICA. The Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles had a Tom of Finland exhibition this year that actually really did exceedingly well, and was a breakthrough there. But I also notice in having conversations here that there doesn't seem to be within the museum world, I think that there actually is knowledge about what's happening in America, and in America what's happening here, but on another level we're not connected, and I find that there's not super amount of knowledge in America about things that are happening in Finland in regards to Tom of Finland, but also I find that there's not a lot of knowledge about what's happening in America here in Europe. And so I think that one of the things that we need to really utilize is to come up with, because what you need is you just need to know the list of queer artists that have exhibitions in museums anywhere in the world. What kind of numbers did they get? And so we need to find a way to produce that so that we can all utilize that for our own our own manipulation of putting the recommendations forward.
Well, we did. Amy Mikowski, who's at the back, set up a cross-museum symposium network, which and Marcus is involved as well. Lots of big museums and smaller ones from London and all around the country are getting together once a year for a symposium where we all meet to talk about different research we're doing, different things we've discovered, and sharing the kind of experiences that we have, the challenges that we've been facing and things. And it's been really, really good. And I think that will grow and maybe, even broaden beyond Britain, perhaps, who knows. But it is great to really get all the LGBTQ groups or LGBTQ museums together in a room every once in a while and talk about, what we're doing, and that solves that kind of problem.
One thing you said, Marcus, I hope what you're doing is getting funded work. I wanted to ask about what process do you think you'll have to go through to get that funded? How can we, sort of arts professionals, to help that happen? Because it just seems to me that you're asking a lot, you're doing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we've kind of exhausted probably the list of people that we know us to do stuff, because Rihanna had a bird, and a lot of the people that you saw are people that we know a little bit. But for Bird, quite an established performer, but it was really important for her. She'd been trying to get a gig at the V&A for ages because it means that it opens more doors for her and stuff. But I don't want to be exploitative. Well, it's a big, because it's a big museum, we should have the money to pay people. So we just have a bit of difficulty because we used to fall under, there was a diversity officer in the learning department, and there kind of isn't one now, or there will be a new one, but it's kind of in the middle, what's happening with that. But we're supposed to be put under the adult learning section, but it's sort of nobody's job specifically to help us at the moment, and it is kind of a little bit understaffed, and people are super busy. So we might email and say, oh, can we meet and talk about this? And with big museums, everything takes a really long time, and you'll be waiting months to actually sort of something going. So we thought, instead of waiting for all of this to sort of become official, let's just do what we can now, and hopefully they will give us a small budget that would probably just cover expenses and artist fees. I mean, that's what I always wanted to do.
But there's no sort of process that you can go through to make that happen. I ran a 3-day ticketed, and we would try at the museum, and we wanted to use that money to then put into like an LGBTQ pot so that we could use that, but they said, oh no, it doesn't work like that. It's like the learning department keeps the money, and we'll give you some back next year in the budget and all this kind of thing. But it didn't. Then they did give us a little bit of money for Betty Bourne, so there were a couple of times where they did give us like a one-time, a bit of cash for one person. But we'd like to get that sort of more, proper system. So they say, okay, you have X amount of pounds for this financial year or whatever. But I don't know if outside people could help us really with that. Do you want to say something?
Sorry, hi. I work at the V&A as well, and I think one of the things we've found is when things are getting tight with cuts and things, that the priorities in the museum fall that if something is a very specific requirement, say for funded projects, that when things get tight, if something has been a requirement of funding, say to address certain audiences or things, that those are obviously the priority to fulfill to get the funding. So if LGBTQ doesn't feature on that, it does slide down the priorities a bit. So that's something that we're trying to kind of encourage the learning department to embed more, and to kind of have that as a listed kind of area of their work. Because at the moment we do kind of praise and encouragement for things, but because it isn't listed as an official specific area, sometimes it does lead to people going, well, this isn't in our
whose job is this type of
it doesn't fall under an easily categorized thing to fulfill. So even though people are encouraged, and to go back to curators' involvement, a lot of the time they are very keen to do things but don't necessarily understand how it might be placed in there. So I've had like the head of our furniture department coming to me saying, I found out all this interesting stuff about Eileen Gray and her personal life fit with the interpretation that will be in the gallery, but maybe you can do something with it and include it in the electronic records about her. So I think a lot of it is what fits within different institutions and exactly should be done, because it's elastic but aren't sure exactly how they can be done. So.
But it is changing. It's getting better and better, I think, every year, really. So hopefully soon it'll be more streamlined.
Sorry, and I had a comment about that, really. I think the work you've done is fantastic, and I think the programme's wonderful. But I think that this is something that needs to be included in strategy of organisations, marketing strategy, audience development strategy, and not something that's an add-on to an organisation. So I think funding really shouldn't be relevant. It actually should be part of the core business of the organisation. So I think there's a battle there to be fought. I'm sure you're aware of that yourself. You know, so I'm not saying that what you're doing isn't worthwhile. It's fantastic and it's a brilliant start. But I do think that the organisers need to think about this. And the Single Equalities Action Qualities Bill requires organisations to take into account the needs of all those protective groups and to make sure that they are actually providing for those needs. So, I mean, my background a long time ago was you know, quite political. I do think that it's worth reminding organisations in a very gentle way and working with them that they have a duty to those audiences, and that this should be part of, you know, the overall marketing and audience development strategy, and not a sort of marginalised issue. It's a legal requirement. Yeah.
Yeah. There are LGBTQ things that are in the programme that we have nothing to do with, like in the Club to Catwalk and Postmodernism exhibition and the Elm Green and Drag Set things. That, like, I think there is an LGBTQ presence, but we just wanted to make it bigger and more diverse, I suppose. That is starting to happen, actually. There's a wedding dresses exhibition, and as they realise, like, oh, you know, gay people can get married too now. So quick, let's ask, who should we ask? Dawn, like, you know. So that is happening. We're being sort of consulted a little bit, and they've trusted us to write all the terminology and that kind of thing, which will be a real sort of legacy thing, like long before, you know, long after we're all gone from the museum. That it hopefully will be, you know, still there and workable.
Hello. I just wanted to pick up on your point, Marcus, about kind of institutional straightness of museums. I thought that was a really important point, and I'm really glad you raised it. So some of the things, for instance, that you're talking about funding and all of these other issues, are really about a kind of institutional homophobia. I work at National Maritime Museum, and the sort of term institutional racism is something that people have kind of come to understand, but there's still not much currency in that kind of chat at national museums. And around straightness, I think it's a useful idea for us all to start kind of thinking and sort of promoting that there maybe is a kind of institutional homophobia. And I've tried to talk to, for instance, HR. I'm in learning myself, and I love your work, and I'm, you know, obviously going to pounce on you and try and get you to come talk to our senior management. And I think there is also a kind of question around conversations to be had with HR departments, as well as audience focusing stuff, as well as collections, and all of these different departments really need to kind of be represented. And my sense is at the moment the kind of people who are on LGBTQ networks within museums are more around the kind of learning end, perhaps curators, but we need to kind of start pulling in some of these other people who should, as you point out quite rightly, Bev, be aware of legislation and be kind of using that muscle to... Sorry, that wasn't a question.
Just while we're talking about networks, Tate has a staff of about 800, and we've got about 10% of the workforce in our LGBT staff network. We open it to both people who are LGB or T and to our straight allies. Important, I think, to include straight allies, because we don't want to be a little quarter talking to ourselves. We want to be talking to people who have the power to take decisions in other areas of the gallery. My work is within the learning team. My job title is Curator of Access and Special Projects, and so most of my work is funded to be around disability. So I organise touch tours, BSL tours, and so on. But because I've got and special projects as part of my job title, I'm able to use part of my budget to go towards LGBT events. But I like to link them with other diversity indicators as well. For example, I've noticed a very, very large crossover between deaf BSL users and an interest in LGBT. So all of my events are BSL interpreted and are very linked, I think, to my access program for that reason.
Well, right, if we could just have one last question, because time's moving on.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, or perhaps could open up more of a discussion, but the idea that institutions have a legal responsibility with the Equalities Act and things to really address the needs and the interests of diverse communities, I think needs to be taken a lot further. The work that people are doing in individual institutions is exciting and I think groundbreaking in many ways. But until pressure is put upon, I remember having this conversation with members of DCMS years ago, until LGBTQ is included in the KPIs, the key performance indicators, which is how museums kind of demonstrate that they are meeting the needs of, say, BA/ME audiences, and that I'm not sure how far one's able to take it once the pressure is put upon museums to really demonstrate that they are addressing these needs and interests of diverse communities, then perhaps you'd have a bit more of a foothold, basically. But until the government is making that demand on institutions and there's money at stake, I think that needs to happen.
Thank you very much. It's 11 o'clock, so we have a scheduled break. Thank you very much. Thank you.